In this episode, we're going to focus on the kind of change that can reshape AI risk even when your internal systems have not changed at all, which is the external environment. For brand new learners, it can feel like security is mostly about what you build and how you configure it. But the truth is that your risk posture also depends on laws, regulators, vendors, competitors, and the evolving capabilities of AI itself. External change can arrive suddenly, and when it does, an organization that is not paying attention often reacts in a rushed and inconsistent way. The goal is to build a calm habit of monitoring external change so you can reassess risk decisions before you are forced into emergency decisions. By the end, you should understand why external changes matter, what kinds of external changes most commonly trigger reassessment, and how to stay current without being consumed by constant news. Before we continue, a quick note. This audio course is a companion to our course companion books. The first book is about the exam and provides detailed information on how to pass it best. The second book is a Kindle-only ebook that contains 1,000 flashcards that can be used on your mobile device or Kindle. Check them both out at cyber.author.me in the Bare Metal Study Guide series. External change monitoring is the practice of tracking developments outside the organization that can alter obligations, exposure, or threat likelihood for AI systems. This is not the same as doom scrolling or chasing every headline, because most headlines do not translate into actionable risk changes for your specific environment. Instead, you are looking for changes that affect what is allowed, what is expected, what is possible, and what is likely. Laws and regulations can change the obligations you must meet, such as how you handle data, how you explain decisions, or how quickly you report incidents. Vendors can change your controls and dependencies through updates, outages, pricing, or policy changes. New AI capabilities can change what users can do and what attackers can do, which changes the likelihood side of risk. Beginners should see external change monitoring as a form of situational awareness that keeps your risk management lifecycle alive. Without it, your risk decisions become stale even if your code base is stable. A practical way to understand why external changes matter is to remember that risk is a relationship between your system and its environment, not a property that lives entirely inside your system. If a new law increases penalties for certain kinds of data exposure, the impact of a confidentiality incident increases even if your technical exposure is unchanged. If a vendor changes how logging works or how data is processed, your exposure pathway can change without your developers making a single code change. If a new AI capability makes automated probing cheap and scalable, likelihood of misuse attempts rises, even if you have not altered your interface. External changes can also shift public expectations, meaning a behavior that was tolerated last year can cause trust damage this year. For beginners, the key idea is that your security boundaries sit in a moving landscape, and a moving landscape can make yesterday's safe decision become today's risky decision. Monitoring keeps you from being surprised by that shift. Monitoring laws and regulations is one of the clearest examples of external change because it directly affects what the organization must do, not just what it would prefer to do. Regulations can influence data retention, data minimization, consent requirements, reporting timelines, and accountability for automated decision-making. They can also affect how you document model behavior, how you communicate with users, and what evidence you must preserve during incidents. In AI systems, regulatory change can also influence expectations around transparency, explainability, and the handling of sensitive categories of data. Beginners sometimes think regulatory compliance is a separate department's problem, but risk reassessment requires security teams to understand what changed and how it affects system design and operations. Even if legal specialists handle interpretation, security must translate obligations into controls, monitoring, and workflows. The goal is not to become a lawyer, but to recognize which external rule changes alter impact, alter acceptable use, or alter required reporting, so the life cycle can adjust before a violation occurs. A common beginner misunderstanding is to assume that regulatory change always means you must shut down AI or freeze innovation until everything is clarified. In reality, regulatory shifts often create a need to refine scope, tighten controls, and improve documentation rather than to stop all activity. For example, a new requirement might focus on how personal data is used, which could be addressed by narrowing data access boundaries, and improving logging controls, while still allowing non-sensitive use cases to proceed. Another requirement might focus on reporting timelines, which could be addressed by improving incident workflows and evidence collection readiness. Regulatory change can also create competitive opportunity for organizations that respond quickly and responsibly, because trust becomes a differentiator. Beginners should see that external change can increase constraints, but constraints can also guide better design and reduce long-term risk. The important habit is to treat regulation as a signal that assumptions must be checked, not as a trigger for panic. Vendors are another major source of external change, and the vendor dimension matters because vendors can change your risk posture through decisions you do not control. A vendor may update a model, change safety filtering behavior, modify retention settings, change access control features, or alter how requests are processed. Vendors can also experience outages, security incidents, or policy shifts that affect your continuity and your data exposure. Even changes that seem benign, like performance improvements, can create security implications if they come with different logging formats or different behavior in edge cases. Beginners often treat vendors as stable utilities, but vendor services evolve constantly, and your risk program must track those evolutions. Monitoring vendor change is not about distrusting vendors. It is about managing dependency. When a vendor changes, you need to know whether your controls still work, whether your monitoring still captures the right evidence, and whether your contractual expectations are still being met. Vendor monitoring also includes watching for changes in the vendor's own commitments and interfaces, because those can affect how you manage risk operationally. If a vendor changes service level terms, the availability impact of outages can shift, and continuity planning may need updates. If a vendor changes support channels or incident communication patterns, your ability to investigate and report may be affected. If a vendor introduces new features, teams may be tempted to enable them quickly, which can expand exposure pathways before risk is reassessed. If a vendor changes how data is handled, such as where it is processed or how it is retained, your data governance assumptions may need a refresh. Beginners should understand that vendor monitoring is both technical and governance-oriented, because it includes performance and behavior changes, as well as policy, contract, and communication changes. A mature program treats vendor updates as change events that may require reassessment, not as background noise. This approach prevents surprises where a vendor change silently weakens a control you relied on. New AI capabilities are a third external change category, and they matter because they can shift what is realistically possible for both helpful users and malicious actors. Capabilities might include stronger reasoning, better code generation, better content synthesis, better tool use, or improved ability to mimic human communication. Even if your organization is not adopting the newest capabilities immediately, outsiders may be, and those capabilities can change the threat landscape. For example, if automation and persuasion become easier, social engineering attempts may become more frequent and more convincing, increasing the likelihood of compromised accounts. If automated probing becomes easier, misuse attempts against public AI interfaces may become more persistent and more scalable. If new model behavior makes prompt injection techniques more reliable, the likelihood of certain abuse cases increases. Beginners should see capability shifts as changes in attacker efficiency and scale, not as magical new categories of harm. The core harms remain familiar, such as data exposure and manipulation, but the ease of achieving those harms can change quickly. External changes in attacker tooling and technique dissemination are closely tied to new AI capabilities, because the threat landscape is shaped not only by what is possible, but by what is widely known and widely automated. A technique might exist for years as a niche idea, then suddenly become common because a framework makes it easy to use. When this happens, likelihood changes rapidly, and a defense program that relies on yesterday's assumptions may be caught off guard. This is where threat intelligence, TI, becomes useful as a focused input, and after the first mention we will refer to this as TI. TI does not mean believing every dramatic claim. It means watching for patterns that indicate techniques are becoming common, scalable, and relevant to your system design. For example, if TI indicates increased exploitation of prompt injection through untrusted content sources, you reassess whether your AI systems ingest untrusted content and how they separate instructions from data. Beginners should see TI as an early warning tool that triggers questions about your own exposure pathways. The goal is to update likelihood estimates and monitoring priorities based on plausible external trend signals. External changes can also come from platform ecosystems and infrastructure providers, which can indirectly affect AI systems even when your vendors are stable. For example, changes in cloud service behavior, identity services, network policies, or logging platforms can affect how your AI services authenticate, how traffic is routed, and what telemetry is collected. Changes in browser security, mobile platform behavior, or API policies can affect how users interact with AI tools and how easily misuse can be automated. Changes in third-party data sources can affect retrieval systems if your AI tools depend on external content feeds or public knowledge bases. Beginners might assume these are separate operational issues, but they can be risk issues because they affect exposure and evidence. If an external platform change reduces logging fidelity, investigation capability suffers, raising impact because you may not be able to prove what happened. If an external platform change introduces new connectivity options, exposure pathways may expand and require new access boundaries. Monitoring external change, therefore, includes watching the broader technology environment that your AI stack relies on. A practical challenge is deciding how to monitor external change without drowning in information, and the answer is to focus on triggers and categories rather than constant scanning. You can treat certain events as automatic reassessment triggers, such as major regulatory announcements relevant to your industry, vendor release notes affecting data handling or safety controls, and widely reported shifts in attacker capability that target your architecture. You can also define a cadence for external review, where you periodically check whether anything meaningful has changed since the last review, and you do this as part of normal governance rather than as an emergency response. Beginners should understand that external monitoring is a process, not a hero activity, and processes work best when they are predictable and repeatable. It also helps to assign ownership for watching each category, such as legal and compliance tracking regulations, while security and engineering track vendor changes and capability trends. The key is that the organization should not rely on accidental discovery through social media or through surprise audit questions. A systematic approach makes external change manageable and prevents reactive chaos. When an external change is detected, the next step is not instantly changing everything, but performing a targeted reassessment that asks what assumption might be invalid now. If a law changes, you ask which data handling or reporting assumptions are affected, and whether controls and documentation still meet the expectation. If a vendor changes, you ask whether any safety, logging, access, or retention behavior has changed, and whether your monitoring and incident readiness still function. If new capabilities change attacker scale, you ask whether your rate awareness, detection, and access controls are sufficient for the new likelihood. This targeted approach prevents overreaction and keeps reassessment proportional. Beginners should also learn to distinguish between external changes that affect obligation, which require compliance alignment, and external changes that affect likelihood, which require security control tuning and monitoring adjustments. Both matter, but they lead to different kinds of work. By connecting external signals to specific assumptions, you turn abstract change into concrete action. External monitoring is also about recognizing the difference between direct impact and indirect impact, because many changes affect you indirectly through customer expectations and partner requirements. A partner might update contract language, requiring stricter controls or faster incident notification, which changes your impact profile and may require workflow updates. Customers may begin asking for assurances about how AI is used, which can increase the importance of documentation, transparency, and audit readiness. Industry standards may evolve, influencing what auditors expect, even if laws are unchanged. Public trust can shift after high-profile incidents elsewhere, making the same technical event more reputationally damaging than it would have been previously. Beginners sometimes treat reputation as soft, but it affects business outcomes and can trigger regulatory and contractual scrutiny. Monitoring these indirect signals helps you adjust communication, governance, and control expectations before friction becomes crisis. The aim is to anticipate questions and obligations rather than responding defensively after trust is damaged. A common misconception is that external monitoring is only about big headlines, when in reality small external changes can have big internal effects. A minor vendor update might change default settings that affect logging retention. A small legal clarification might change how a certain type of data must be handled. A new AI capability might quietly lower the barrier for phishing and credential theft, increasing the likelihood of compromised accounts that can then misuse internal AI systems. Another misconception is that external change monitoring is optional if your systems are internal only, but internal systems still rely on vendors, still face insider and compromise risks, and still operate under legal and contract frameworks. Beginners should also avoid the misconception that external monitoring is only security's job, because it is a shared function where legal, compliance, procurement, engineering, and security must coordinate. The practical security lesson is that external changes often enter your environment through decisions like enabling a new vendor feature or expanding a contract. So monitoring must connect to those decision channels. When monitoring is embedded into governance, it becomes reliable and sustainable. Finally, external change monitoring should feed back into your ongoing risk management lifecycle so that reassessment becomes a normal event, not a special crisis ritual. When you detect a meaningful external shift, you update likelihood and impact estimates, you adjust controls and monitoring thresholds, and you update documentation and training where needed. You also update your vendor outage and degraded mode plans when vendor dependency risk changes, and you update incident reporting readiness when reporting obligations change. Over time, this creates an organization that adapts smoothly because it expects the environment to move and it has a way to move with it. Beginners should see that the goal is not to predict the future perfectly. It is to reduce surprise by staying oriented. External change monitoring is how you maintain that orientation, and it is one of the quiet foundations of mature AI security. When you practice it consistently, risk management becomes less reactive and more confident, which supports innovation because teams know that changes will be caught and handled responsibly. As we close, monitoring external changes like laws, vendors, and new AI capabilities is about keeping your risk decisions aligned with a world that is moving even when your internal systems are steady. Regulatory change can alter obligations and impact. Vendor change can alter controls and exposure, and capability change can alter likelihood by making abuse easier and more scalable. A practical approach focuses on meaningful triggers, uses a disciplined cadence, and translates external signals into targeted reassessments of specific assumptions. Inputs like TI are useful when they are used to ask architecture-focused questions rather than to spread fear. External change monitoring also includes indirect signals from partners, customers, and standards bodies, because those signals reshape expectations and consequences. When you embed this monitoring into governance and connect it to reassessment, you build a security program that stays current without being consumed by constant alarm. That steadiness is what allows the business to adopt AI with confidence, because opportunity can move forward while risk decisions remain grounded in reality.
Thanks for listening. For more audio courses, daily newsletters, and more, please visit BareMetalCyber.com.